Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Peace Podcast. This is Just Let Me Heal the I'm Too Much wound, whatever that looks like. And so a lot of us have this overwhelming sense that we are too much. And I remember one time when this really hit me, and I think I may have told this story before, but when I was in the nail salon and my nail guy and I have been going strong for literal years, and he said something that was funny and I laughed like I normally do, which sometimes can have a crazy sound to it. And the ladies who were over getting a pedicure said something about the laugh being obnoxious. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, like I remember that. Like I know that feeling. That's a familiar feeling. And I also said out loud, imagine criticizing somebody for the sound of them experiencing joy, just so they would know that like that's probably not something that we judge people for. The sound of their laughter is pretty crazy to me. But I also connected it to experiences that I had in childhood, like just existing oftentimes felt like I was too much. In fact, in a very literal form, whenever I would go into spaces where my family was, I would be told like how fat I was or how much weight I'd gained, or there was a very strong focus on physical appearance, and there was very strong verbiage around acceptance because of physical appearance, or being rejected because of physical appearance. And I often thought it was funny that I had this wound of either not feeling like I was enough or feeling like I was too much. And of course I had that wound because the childhood that I remember literally told me that my physical body was too big. It was too much. And I lived my entire life walking on my own eggshells, hoping that I wasn't being too much in a situation, and then also hoping that I was not being too little in a situation. And that narrative just followed me wherever, because our too much wound really stems from that childhood messaging that our emotions or our presence are creating an unsafe environment. And usually that happens because the people that we are in community with during that phase of life are dysregulated. So our need for emotional support or attention, our need to be inquisitive, and our tendency to be funny and or just be an emotional human made the people around us feel unsafe because they were not regulated enough to be able to deal with whatever we were bringing to the table. I think that this happens even more intensely for women because women, especially in a religious aspect, are told to shrink themselves. And submission doesn't necessarily mean to shrink. And following the head of the household doesn't really mean that you don't have a space there. But I think historically, that's what we've been taught. Just listen to what you're told and don't rock the boat and become less of yourself. And also when you're taking care of children, you have to shrink your own needs to accommodate the needs of other people. And so that's a deeply rooted and embedded narrative that women are told, which is if you are going to be enough for the title that you are being, then you can't be too much of yourself because you have to self-sacrifice in order to be good at that title. I'm definitely not saying that that's true, but I know it's a narrative that we have heard. And that definitely attaches roots to that I'm too much wound. Because if you're told that when you're in spaces fully embodying who you are, that is going to create a situation where you can't be the best at these things that you are, that you're being, the role that you're playing, then you're going to feel like you have to shrink yourself in order to play those roles in the spaces. So how do we reclaim our voice? How do we take up space? How do we feel free in the moment if we've been taught to fit into this box to make other people feel comfortable? Well, the research tells us that I'm too much wound comes from shame-based conditioning and then the need to survive in those spaces. So it is a manipulation tactic, 100% a psychological manipulation tactic that makes the person that it's being told to less of what they're being, to make the person who is spinning the narrative feel more in control and more comfortable. Just like the ladies in the nail salon, I was probably disrupting whatever conversation they were having with my laughter. But also, a lot of times when we judge other people for something, it's because it's something that we don't give ourselves permission to do. So hearing me laugh loudly may have tweaked something in them or triggered something in them that reminded them that they don't give themselves the same permission to take up space and draw breath as a person who would laugh that loudly. And so because they're used to shrinking themselves, then they have an expectation that everyone around them should shrink themselves as well. And when they don't, or when they're not, then that person will judge them for taking up too much space, even if it's in audio waves. Like, it just is a thing. And, you know, we know it originates from shame-based conditioning. We know that it is manipulative, but why do we latch onto it as a survival strategy? Well, because the thing is, when you're in those spaces, and especially if you're somebody who has been in an abusive childhood situation or an abusive relationship, you very quickly learn that if you just become what they expect you to be and you don't embody your actual self, that it makes things easier. It's now the chaos is existing inside of you, but externally, it's just easier. And so that is a survival mechanism that you will most certainly attach to, because shrinking equals safety. To survive in this space with the least amount of discomfort, with the least amount of conflict, with the least amount of external chaos, I'm going to shrink the parts of me that can be abrasive to other people, that can cause tension with other people, that can create chaos and conflict with other people. Because if I don't shrink them, then I'm going to have to deal with the chaos that ensues afterward. And that doesn't feel safe to me. So if I want safety, then in order to survive in the space that I'm in, I have to shrink the parts of me, which means I'm going to chronically self-silence myself. I'm going to chronically become who they need me to become. And that exists for your childhood. And then you don't just shed your survival strategies when you become an adult. In fact, you keep them until you convince yourself that you're safe. So even if you're in a safe circumstance, you will still repeat the survival patterns that you developed early on in life, because you now have to convince your brain and your body to believe that you're safe. Because even if you are safe, it doesn't mean that you're going to shed those survival strategies because you have relied on them to keep you safe. So what it looks like is, whether in negative relationships or toxic relationships or in healthy ones, you'll second guess the things that you're going to say. If you have something to add to the conversation, you're going to second guess that comment. If somebody asks your opinion, you might give them the opinion that's more in alignment with what you think that they want to hear, because that self-silencing is going to lead to what feels like safety. But if you do that for long enough, if you change what you're going to say to match what you think they want to hear, and if you silence how you really feel in the course of a conversation, if you change your tune because you don't want to deal with conflict, all of those things over the course of time will start to lead to identity suppression. So you're actually, instead of being in alignment with who God created you to be, instead of being in alignment for what your purpose to be, instead of being in alignment with what you're supposed to be bringing to those conversations and relationships, you start to suppress who you are in order to be more palatable to the people in the space. And the more you suppress your identity, the better you get at doing it. So you're literally shape-shifting. You're a chameleon. You're going into every room that you're going into with the goal of keeping yourself and the circumstance and the situation safe. And so you know what to say, what not to say, who to show up as or who not to show up as. I mean, there are even videos surfacing right now going around on the socials of people who are upset with their best friends for coming to their birthday party dressed too nicely. Because if you're going to come to my party and the spotlight's supposed to be on me, then you can't dress a way that's going to draw attention to you, because you should dress a way that's going to make the attention drawn on me. When really the person was like, I was just trying to show up looking nice to your birthday party. Like, it wasn't really about you. I just wanted to show up for you and look nice at the same time. But they're expecting you to shrink who you are in order for them to get what they need. And because the people around you have become so accustomed to you shrinking yourself and suppressing your identity, when you do show up as your real self, it has them questioning, who is this person? Where did she even come from? And I don't even know if this is the you that I knew you as. And those are conversations that they will even have with you to get you back into the box that they want you to fit into to make them comfortable. But what it develops in you are feelings of anxiety. So every time you're about to go into a space where there are people that aren't your safe people, you start to feel anxiety because you're like, okay, who do I need to show up as? Am I going to be too much for these people? How much do I have to dim myself in this experience? Am I able to be in alignment with who I actually am? And eventually what that leads to is not wanting to show up at all, because the anxiety will feel so heightened that you will have to perform in those spaces that you'll just be like, you know what, I'd rather not show up at all. And another thing that happens is that when you're in healthy relationships, people want you to be authentically and organically you. And when they haven't gotten that version of you and you've been performing because you felt like you were too much, then they start to get shocked and blindsided when the real you shows up, because the person that they got into relationship with was this chameleon that did whatever they felt like the person around them wanted them to do. And you can only wear that mask for so long, and eventually you start to show up, which is a good thing, because the more the authentic version of you shows up, the less you're in spaces with people that you're not in alignment with and you don't belong in the room with. But when you have relationships, whether it be with a romantic partner or in friendship, where they met you in a space where you were being a chameleon, then you start to be your real self. They're going to question what in the world is happening, because they're not used to that real version of you. They're used to the performative version of you, which leads to relational challenges, because now you have people exacerbating that too much wound because they're questioning who you're showing up as. But the reason that they're questioning who you're showing up as is because you hid who you really were in the beginning. And it creates this cycle of you feeling like you need to create peace and safety, but people questioning when your mask falls down, why you showed up as this version of yourself now when that's not the way you showed up before. So things that we have to do are reclaiming the fullness of who we are. And in order to reclaim the fullness of who we actually are, we have to convince our nervous system that we, one, know how to keep ourselves safe, and two, that the safety lies in being authentically ourselves. Because the reality is that when you were a child, you had to stay in the places that you were in for survival. You were relying on the people that put you into the box. You were relying on them to give you your basic needs, to meet your basic needs. You needed them to clothe you and feed you and shelter you, etc. And now, as a grown-up, you don't need those people to give you your basic needs. You can provide them for yourself. And so because of that, your nervous system has to be reset to actually believe that. Because there's no way that you can reclaim your fullness, walk back into your true authentic self, if you're thinking that the people around you are necessities in your life to provide your basic needs. Your nervous system is still going to be in survival mode. But if you can convince yourself that you are safe, that you are still fed, clothed, and sheltered regardless of how people expect you to show up, and that you are quite capable of being able to say yes to the people who accept you for your wholeness and no to the people who require you to shrink and conform into that box in order for them to be comfortable. Before you didn't have a choice, but now you do. And the choice is to be able to say, I no longer am willing to sit in spaces with people who think that I'm too much, because my number one goal is to completely and authentically be the fullest version of me. And if the people who are in this space do not feel comfortable around me, then we don't need to share space, because I'm no longer going to shrink myself to fit in a box that makes them feel comfortable. I'm no longer going to change who I am and suppress my identity for them to feel like they can be more comfortable in a space. I'm no longer going to let anxiety riddle me and create challenges in relationship because I'm refusing to show up as my authentic self because I'm afraid that I'm going to be too much. But now I'm going to be the fullest version of me, and then let the cards fall where they may. People may walk out of your life. People may question who you are and wonder where the old version of you is. But the people who are supposed to be in your world are the people who are going to value and hold space for you to be authentically yourself over you making them feel comfortable. And this is not a get out of jail free card or a free pass for you to just be a jerk to everybody. We're not talking about, being ugly to people and then calling it, oh, I'm just real. We're not talking about that. But what we are talking about is embodying who you really are, the person that God created you to be, and being able to walk in the world in that way. And it's also a spiritual practice because of that. Because if you've always conformed to what other people want you to be doing, saying, and how you're being, and it's all because of the script that they've written or a narrative that they need, then how are you ever asking God who He created you to be? And honestly, He knew you before you were ever in your mother's womb. He knew exactly who you were going to be and the whole entire plan for your life. So He knows that right now you're questioning who you actually are in Him. And He's waiting for that conversation for you to say, hey, God, who'd you create me to be? Because I'm so used to living the narrative that somebody else has written for me that I don't even know how to be the person you created me to be. Can you show me the ways? Can you show me my next step? Can you show me who you created me to be? And then can you cultivate a life where I can obediently walk in the spaces that you want me to walk in, so that I don't have to worry about being too much, but that people want to receive all of me in those spaces, because that's why they walked into the room where I am, because they want to receive the fullness of everyone who is in the room. See, shrinking is born from fear, but if you want to thrive, that requires your presence, and it requires you to be bold, and it requires you to not shrink into your anxiety, because you were never too much in the first place. The environment simply couldn't handle the fullness of you. And that doesn't mean that there was something wrong with the people in the environment. They're dealing with their own experiences and their own weight of their childhood themselves. But what it does mean is now that you're in a space where you get to control how you show up, you're going to show up as the full version, not the minimized version. You're going to show up authentically yourself, not apologizing for the way that you feel, think, or are. And you're going to express yourself fully, because that's how God requires you to be. That's why he put you in that space. So this week, I want you to just think about how you're showing up. If you feel yourself shrinking, write it down. If you feel yourself silencing your voice, or you feel that old feeling of anxiety, or you feel yourself apologizing for just being or withholding your opinion because you're afraid that somebody might think you're too much, write it down in your journal. And then take one intentional step toward expressing yourself fully. So in the moment, you might not be able to. You might not be able to shift that quickly. But what you can do is write it down. And when you feel it welling up again, you can say, nope, I recognize that I did that before. And this time, I'm going to say my opinion. I'm going to show up as myself authentically. I'm going to be who God created me to be in this space. Because I know that I'm not too much. I know that I'm exactly who I was created to be. And I don't have to carry the shame of the people who were in my past that kept me in this small, unclaimed space. But it's time for me to reclaim my space, my voice, and all of me, so that I can start living a life that is bold and free and surrendered to who God created and crafted me to be. I hope this video resonated with you. Whether it did or didn't, make sure that you like and subscribe to my pages, follow me on all socials, and make sure you share this video with somebody that you feel that it would resonate with, because you never know what message could just be the catalyst for change that they need to break free from the bondage that they're in and to surrender to a life of freedom. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll see you again next time.